Thank you, colleagues, all for joining us. We have a really great topic to discuss today on remittances and whether fintech has lived up to expectations. I will start by introducing our panel. We have a great panel. We have Fabio Araújo, who joins us from the Central Bank of Brazil, where he coordinates the work on the implementation of the digital version of the Brazilian real. This is recently named DREX. Tito da Silva Filho, who joins us from our Strategy, Policy and Review Department, where he has led the work on remittances, and he will give us a quick overview of his recent paper today. Dilip Ratha, who joins us from the World Bank Group. He recently wrote an article on the power of remittances for the IMF's Finance and Development magazine and has been working on these issues for a long time at the bank and has done a podcast on the same topic. Do check it out. They're really great pieces of literature and information. And last but not least, we have Tao Sun, who joins us from the IMF's Monetary and Capital Markets Division, where he is a Deputy Division Chief. Tao has previously worked with the People's Bank of China and Ant Group, Alibaba Group, and has great experience on these topics. So today we hope to have an insightful seminar and discuss some of the issues in whether technology can unclog pipelines, or more clearly, we seek to understand how effective fintech has been to decrease frictions in the remittances market. Of course, AI is the buzzword of today, and until very recently it was fintech. In 2016, Brookings published an article called The Coming Fintech Revolution. In 2019, Forbes published an article named How Fintech is Eating the World, and The Economist featured an article on fintech takes aim at the steep cost of international money transfers. We actually had the Bali Fintech agenda, where we, together with the World Bank, we looked a lot at fintech, the opportunities and risks from fintech, and elements on how best to address them. Of course, Bitcoin and blockchain were touted as solutions to expensive remittances. And for many countries, it's hard to overstate the importance of remittances. For millions of people, this is a lifeline, and especially for some of the poorer countries, they actually also play a crucial role when countries have balance of payment problems and resilience becomes more important, like also during the pandemic. And for some countries, they are actually more than 20% of GDP. So they are a critical part of the economic activities of many countries. They are very costly. A large share of remitted money is extracted in the form of fees, premiums, instead of helping those who really need them. And sometimes there's an inequality. The poorest countries face the highest cost. And not surprisingly, the importance of remittances has long been acknowledged, and their costs have become part of the SDGs. Fintech has been considered by many as a disruptive force in the financial system and was seen as the solution to reducing the costs of remittances. However, our colleague Tito had issues with this narrative, decided to write a paper explaining why he thinks differently, and I'm going to ask him to please give us a brief overview of why you decided to go against the grain, and provide a summary of your paper and tell us what can be done going forward. Over to you, Tito.
Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So the short answer is that I look at the evidence. I did some research on Bitcoin and blockchain in around 2017, when they were at their peak. And then I wrote a paper 2 years ago on the drivers of remittance costs. And the evidence for me was not convincing about the disruption narrative. So that's where I'm coming from. So perhaps the best place to start is to note that fintech is not a new word, even though it has entered the dictionary only in 2018. But financial services, they have been benefiting hugely from technological advances for many decades. Some good examples are ATMs, credit cards, internet banking, and online brokers. They all have affected hugely our lives. In the very remittance market itself, it has been greatly impacted by the creation of SWIFT. So financial technology is a long-standing issue. It's not a new phenomenon. So the question is, why there has been so much hype with fintech? The short answer is, this time is different. People see the recent wave of innovation as being unique in the sense that they consider it to be disruptive. And why is that? It's because there has been in recent decades a surge in connectivity, which is underpinned by the widespread use of the internet, the advent of the smartphone. Let's not forget that smartphones are something that are new. So the iPhone came in 2007. It seems a long time ago, but it was in 2007. And also a sharp increase in the coverage and speed of communications network. So those three factors made the world become hyper-connected. So this new technological landscape, if you will, set the groundwork for the emergence of the so-called fintechs, which are companies whose business model is deeply rooted in this new virtual framework, in which allow them to provide services in a more efficient way, faster, cheaper, and more convenient. So from one side, we have the traditional financial institutions, which are considered to be outdated, using legacy system, a large footprint. On the other side, we have the fintechs, which are considered to have the state-of-the-art technology, nimble, a smart footprint. Interestingly, this financial landscape emerged amid long-standing concerns from the international community on the cost of remittances, which culminated with the inclusion of remittance costs in the SDGs. And indeed, the BIS and the FSB noted that cross-border retail payments are perceived to be slow, costly, and opaque. And recently, in 2020, the G20 endorsed the roadmap for enhancing cross-border payments. So therefore, there seems to be no better setting for analyzing the disruptive effects of fintech. So if fintech are disrupting the financial system, we should be able to see it in the remittances market. Not surprisingly, in recent years, we have seen many predictions about the disruption of the remittance market. Many people said the disruptions was just around the corner. So all those narratives involved three materializations of fintech. The first materialization is Bitcoin and the underlying technology that made it possible, which is the blockchain. Those were the boldest predictions and also the predictions that failed most miserably, the Bitcoin and blockchain. So the initial articles argued that transactions even would be able to be done instantaneously at a very tiny fraction of the original cost. Nowadays, we know that that narrative did not pan out. Remittances through Bitcoin is virtually non-existent, and that's why it was surprising that El Salvador recently decided to make Bitcoin a legal tender. One of the main reasons was precisely remittance costs. Then we also have mobile money. To be honest, mobile money has always been more associated with financial inclusion than with remittances. But many people had an optimistic view of mobile money as an important way to lower remittance costs. And then we have, if you will, the new kid on the blocks, which are the remittance fintechs, which I'm going to call it Remittances. So they have been long touted as a disruptor. Just to give an example of the mood of the spirit at that time, probably the most successful Remtech had once in its homepage the following sentence: "Bye-bye banks." That sentence now is gone, but I also would like to give you one of the CEO of that company once posed a question. I'm going to read it for you. How is that it's free to send an email and it costs to send money? Why does it have to cost so much at all when I'm just moving bits and bytes around? So this was the mood when Remittances came. So just some food for thought here that I'd like to make. While Bitcoin and mobile money are genuine financial innovations, Remittances are much more about business models than about innovations. I think that's an important point to make. So how does the financial landscape looks like in the remittance market? So what about the main players? The main players, which, as I said, are considered or were considered to be outdated, it's MTOs, which are present virtually in all corridors, remittance corridors. Then we have Remittances, of course, and indeed they have been growing very fast. And today they are present in as many corridors as banks, which is almost 70%. And we also have mobile money that they are present in just a little bit above 10% of the corridors. So this is in terms of the players. What about the costs? So it's widely known that banks are the most costly remittance services providers, and Remittances are the least costly. In addition, mobile money is the cheapest method for funding a remittance transaction, right? So for now, everything to be going in the right direction of the narrative of disruption, but we are going to discuss more that later today. And another important information is what regions of the world face the highest costs. And unfortunately, 7 out of 10 of the most expensive countries and 6 out of 10 of the most expensive corridors are located in SSA. And this is very unfortunate, is the inequality that Sheila mentioned, because those who need the most remittances are precisely those who are paying the highest costs. Let me finish by saying that since 2016, the pace of decrease in remittance costs has slowed down a lot. So this is the situation we are facing today, and we're still far from the SDG target, which is 3% of costs on average, with no corridor above 5%. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Tito, for that overview, and we will discuss some of these issues that you mentioned. We have, now it's about 2:20, and we have till 2:45 to discuss some of the questions among the panel, and then I'm going to go to the floor to get some questions. I'm going to start with you, Dilip. You're an expert on remittances. You've been working on these issues, writing on these issues. Can you tell us a bit more on some of the issues Tito already mentioned in terms of differences across regions, your views as to what needs to be done to bring down the costs of remittances?
Thank you. I think I would start with just some new data on remittances, and then I'll talk about costs. To 2022, remittances to developing countries, low and middle income countries, were $647 billion. And this year, they're likely to be larger than that, 2023. We will come out with a report in about 2 weeks' time. And we just put together some data on capital flows to developing countries. Foreign direct investment and portfolio equity, bond flows, syndicated bank lending. Private capital flows are down compared to 10 years ago by 33% almost. Remittance flows are almost double in that time period. And remittance flows are now larger than the sum of foreign direct investment and ODA combined. And we also know that smaller countries or more fragile countries or crisis affected countries or those who are hit by natural disasters, they receive more money. Haiti or Tonga, Somalia, Afghanistan, remittances to GDP ratios are in the range of about 40–50% of GDP. Remittance costs in those corridors are especially high. So the point that Tito mentioned about remittance costs being kind of regressive, they're highly regressive. In the large corridors like GCC countries to, let's say, South Asia, India in particular, costs are lower. Singapore to Philippines, costs are some of the lowest. But sending money from north to, let's say, anywhere from Europe or the US to sub-Saharan Africa, it is among the highest cost, more than 8% on average. 2/3 of migrants in sub-Saharan Africa, international migrants, are within sub-Saharan Africa, meaning that intra-regional remittances within sub-Saharan Africa are very high. And the cost of sending money within Africa can be as high as 15 or 20%. Often that has to go through 2 currency conversions. And currency conversion is an additional dimension to costs on top of the fees that are charged by the RemTechs or the remittance service providers. Banks are more expensive, we know that, but money transfer companies, they would say they're very cheap, but they don't realize often, or sometimes they also mislead us, that they are collecting the fee in terms of foreign exchange markups. That is highly regressive.
Yeah, very much agreed, and I think we will talk about whether fintech can address some of these issues or not in this panel. So Tao, you have great experience from the Chinese fintech ecosystem. Tell us your views on how fintechs may or may not be able to improve the remittances market in terms of especially the costs.
Thank you, Chela. In the last 1 or 2 decades, we have seen rapid development of fintech, not only in domestic context, but across border. We see some large fintech, like big tech, and some specialized fintech, like Western Union, MoneyGram, Hello. This kind of new specialized fintech firm have been providing remittance services. In my observation, they have been a kind of potential for them to address the challenges in cross-border payments, including remittances. We typically say there are 4 challenges. One is high cost, one is low speed, the third one is limited access, the fourth one is limited transparency. For fintech, they have 3 major advantages. One is they have some technology capability, as Tito mentioned just now. They are using digital technology to promote efficiency. That's one. The second one, they are using tremendous data to provide inclusive service for individuals. So using the data analytics, they can get a better consumer portrait to better serve the users. The third one, fintech has the potential to build up an ecosystem, a so-called platform, to link with different stakeholders, including traditional bank. So in this way, fintech can help reduce the cost, increase the speed, and expand the access. So we can see in some country, there is a new fintech using blockchain to send a remittance only in a couple of seconds. So this is a kind of way we see the potential for fintech to develop.
Great. I think the question is, there's potential, but why are we not seeing this potential in reality? So Fabio, tell us about Brazil's very impressive experience so far. You have been forefront of the research on central bank digital currencies, the CBDCs, and you have a plan to launch the Brazilian CBDC. I think it's the official name is Drex, you can educate us on this. There's of course the very successful instant payment system, the PIX. So how does this all work, and what are your views in terms of the implications for the remittances market?
Thanks for the question. Well, we have just issued a couple of years ago the PIX, and it's focused on providing a unified rail for the fintech ecosystem. It was a huge success. In 1 month, we achieved the number of users that we expected to achieve in 1 year. But it's focused on payments, and we've been talking about the possibilities to use that same rail for cross-border payments. But as we notice, the problems are not that much in technology, but much more in regulation and international agreements, geopolitical aspects that need to be sorted out. Apart from PIX, we are developing Drex that has a quite different objective. The focus is on providing financial services. If PIX aimed at democratizing access to payment services in Brazil, Drex, our digital real, the version of the digital real, is focused on financial services. It's focused more on deepening the financial inclusion that PIX started. Then I think that this discussion regarding CBDCs are quite in line with the discussion on blockchains and these new technologies. And I think that one of the most important aspects of that for remittances and for other cross-border payments is that we have today 100 central banks, around 100 central banks working on the same sort of technology, trying to figure out ways to connect their systems. And that's a very good opportunity that we shouldn't miss. But the problem is not the technology. We could use other technologies before to solve the problem. Now we have this conjunction of pretty much all the central banks working on a CBDC solution. And besides that, we have the G20 roadmap for increasing the efficiency of cross-border payments. I think that these two aspects together may help us to achieve a good solution for remittances and for cross-border payments in general. But the main problem from where I stand is regulatory.
Can you tell us a bit more, Fabio, if I can stay with you for a little longer? So, you know, we know that the remittances are not macro-critical for Brazil. The annual volume is about 5 billion and less than 0.5% of Brazil's GDP. But the cost of sending remittances to Brazil is just below 6.5%, which is high for a country with sophisticated financial system and these innovations that you talked about. So can you tell us a bit more as to you know, why these innovations, which are for domestic payment systems, they are not necessarily for improving the cost of international payments, but can you tell us a bit more as to how they can be expanded, or what would be, you mentioned some of the regulatory issues, but what are lessons that can be used to improve retail cross-border payments?
Yeah, that's true. The cost of remittances here in Brazil are quite high, and I think that the most relevant factor to explain that is that these operations rely here in Brazil on a very old regulatory framework that the central bank has been working on modernizing it. Recently, we approved a set of rules here in Brazil to promote improvements in regulation of foreign exchange and international capital markets to increase competition. One objective is to enable new business models and to reduce costs for making international payments and transfer more accessible to the population and to small companies. The main change that we promoted is that we allow non-bank PSPs to operate in FX. That was quite different from what we had before. We had just banks operating in FX, in the FX market. Then if any other sort of financial institution wanted to operate, they needed to go through a bank that would increase the cost. And now we are allowing these companies, non-bank PSPs or other brokers operating in the Brazilian market, to have prepaid accounts and credit cards that can be used for purchase or for making and receiving payments in the international market. We think that this is going to happen to reduce that cost. But as I said before, the main point is regulatory. We have this outdated FX market regulation here in Brazil. And even though we have been working on innovating the financial market here in Brazil, it's quite sophisticated from the domestic point of view. But for the FX relation with other countries, it's quite old. And I think we hope that this and other actions that we are taking are going to help to reduce this cost and to make it easier for Brazilians and for non-residents and for people living abroad to exchange funds with Brazil.
Great, thank you for that. So regulation, outdated FX market regulation in a country where there has been actually a lot of progress in terms of financial innovation. I'm going to ask Tao and Tito both, and then come to you, Dilip, about what do you think are the main barriers? Fabio mentioned regulatory issues, FX markets. Are there other barriers, and what can be done to improve and to be able to improve cross-border remittances? So maybe we start with you, Tao.
Thank you. Yes, regulatory legal framework could be a potential challenge because different countries have different framework. One immediate challenge would be what's the data policy for different countries. Some countries have some policy on data flow, data storage, and even potential data sharing. So this kind of information need to be addressed to ensure the clear information sharing. Another example is KYC and AML CFT requirements, and also some specific policy on like capital control, sanctioning, screening. These are also required in remittances. So these kind of challenges are quite common, especially to emerging market economy and low-income countries. Another challenge could be related to how do we address the possible challenges from the cross-border coordination in terms of platform, in terms of new financial innovation. For example, we have seen new instruments like CBDC, stablecoin. How do we see this kind of new instruments can be employed to promote financial inclusion as well as remittances? So all these need international coordination, including from the World Bank and IMF. That's my major points.
And there's quite a lot of work at the bank and the fund on these issues and trying to bring the international community together. Tito, you explain in your paper there has been, of course, some good successes in Kenya and some other countries, but this has not been, mobile money has not been able to take off elsewhere. So can you give us a bit more information on this and more broadly what you're thinking on what have been the deterrents in terms of take-up and what can be done going forward?
Okay, thank you, Sheila. Yeah, mobile money is a very interesting story. It's people keep talking about technology and AI and those very fancy words, but mobile money was built on top of a very simple technology, which is a messaging system. It began with simple phones, not even a smartphone. In the same way that SWIFT is basically a messaging system that had a lot of effects on cross-border payments. I see the same elements in with mobile money, which means that sometimes very simple solutions can have great impacts. But the issue here would be that how come mobile money has been so successful in Kenya, for instance, but not elsewhere? It has not really disseminated as many people hoped for. And here is when you look at the Kenya context, you see that there were a lot of factors that help with that, and we didn't see the same factors necessarily in other countries. So just to give you some numbers, M-Pesa is in 7 Africa countries, so Kenyan and other 6. It has a little bit above 50 million customers, and its network of agents, it's about 600,000 agents. Only Kenya itself holds about 60% of M-Pesa customers and about 50% of agents of M-Pesa. And when you realize that the other countries have a population which is 6-fold the size of Kenya's population, you see really that this asymmetry is very, very large. So I would say that M-Pesa is largely a Kenya success. And indeed, Vodacom tried twice to implement M-Pesa in South Africa, didn't succeed. Also other countries, African countries like Nigeria, mobile money has not taken off. Latin America and Middle East and North Africa, the same thing. So the question is, what is going on? And as I was telling, a lot of the success about M-Pesa, it's due to happenstance. So M-Pesa has a large footprint of agents in Kenya, as I mentioned, about 50% of the total number of agents. That means that it is very easy to exchange cash for mobile money and vice versa. It's very easy to send to relatives. So the fact that there were so many agents made M-Pesa viable. At the same time, M-Pesa has the virtual monopoly of mobile money in Kenya. The last number I saw was 98% of the market. That means that you have huge network effects and acceptability increases a lot. People accept because other people also accept. And that kind of sidestepped interoperability challenges that one usually faces. Also, I must say, and Fabio mentioned regulation, Kenya had an open-minded regulator. So the Central Bank of Kenya was willing to experiment when mobile M-Pesa first came. And the only basic requirement that it set was for M-Pesa to put aside the client's money in a trust account. So many other countries like Nigeria and Ghana, they have a different approach to mobile money, what is called a bank-led approach. So concluding, replicate the success of M-Pesa in other countries is not easy because of the widespread of the large number of agents, which in the monopoly, which makes interoperability challenges much lower. And we see that in the World Bank statistics, around 12% of corridors, you have mobile, in a meaningful way, mobile money remittances. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Right, so difficult to replicate because of some of these specificities of the Kenya market. Dilip, tell us how the remittances market is working in terms of, especially in the context of the remittance fintechs, and how do you assess the probability that we will be able to reach the SDG target? Are we making enough progress, and what would you like to see more of?
Well, I think the simple answer, which is not a nice thing to have to say, the SDG target of reducing remittance costs to 3% by 2030 will almost certainly not be achieved. And largely, it's a simple fact that foreign exchange markups themselves are 3 to 6% in the case of retail payments and remittances. And even for cross-border wholesale payments, where the volume involving low and middle income countries is nearly $8 trillion, there the foreign exchange markup still tends to be 80 to 120 basis points for wholesale people. So for retail transactions and cross-border remittance transactions that are small in size, it is almost certain that the 3% cost target will not be achieved. Are we doing then any better in terms of the remittance fee part of it, not the FX markup, just the remittance fee part of it? And I was on the last International Day of Family Remittances, June 16, in Nairobi. And there was a huge, I would say, optimism there and enthusiasm among the African fintech industry. They are really taking on the world sort of thing. But then you push them a little bit and ask them what exactly is the cost of sending money from Nairobi to Accra, Nairobi to, let's say, Congo or to Senegal. And the answers were not very straightforward. So the M-Pesa success story, which is touted a lot, is probably great story. It is great story. But then there is the same story of UPI payments in China and Ant Financial and everything, Alibaba type of success story in China and the story of UPI payments in India. They're working very, very well. That said, that's a domestic payment issue. Cross-border payment involving M-Pesa or UPI payments or Alibaba, they are not doing very well at all. And I was there in my village in India, and the fee that my brother was, who is a professor in the US, he paid, professor of economics that too, he paid 9.36% to draw cash in a rural ATM machine. So the great news is ATM machine worked for a bank account that is sitting in the US. The bad news is it cost 9.36%. And even worse news, he did not know that he had paid that much. He just did not care. That is telling you that transparency remains a major issue. In other words, fintech is not working. Fintech for poor people is definitely not working yet. Yep. And that is because fintech is still for the rich people, the smartphone people, those who can count and calculate. And there is that opportunism that is there in this market. I would like to point out the two major roadblocks in terms of regulation. We may not have time to talk about that, so I'll just mention it quickly. One is the AML-CFT, anti-money laundering and the countering of financing of terrorism regulations that we just heard about. That regulation right now is rule-based, and it has to move towards a risk-based approach. And it should move towards a risk-based approach, starting with the premise that small remittances are not money laundering. I think it is the other way right now. It is completely the opposite right now. We need to go to a regulation where we have to say small remittances are not money laundering, and then develop risk metrics to identify risky transactions. The other low-hanging fruit, so to say, which fragments the market and affects competition in the remittance markets, which is why costs are so high, especially in smaller corridors, thinner corridors, is the exclusivity contracts between national post offices and money transfer companies and telecom companies, including in Kenya. When there are exclusive contracts between national bank branches, post offices, or telecom companies, or telecom networks, that stifles competition, reduces entry of new players, especially fintech players. So these two combined have kept a oligopolistic market, and they also, particularly the AML/CFT regulations, have led to de-risking behavior by correspondent banks. So actually many fintechs with better technology, they are not able to enter the market simply because they cannot get a correspondent bank account. So no, fintech has remained an aspiration so far. Much can be done by simplifying regulation.
Very good. You provided us also with some ideas as to why you think the impact is limited so far, and what would be the key impediments to work on in order to increase the impact of fintech. That's excellent. On AML/CFT, I was just remembering that the former central bank governor of Kenya, who used to be a colleague at the fund here, told us a story once and mentioned that, you know, when they were looking at monitoring the M-Pesa transactions, they saw this huge uptick around between 5 and 6 a.m. and they thought, oh, this is money laundering, they better stop all this, no transactions between 5 and 6. And then they do some more work and they found out that actually it was the women who work in the markets, and they were using that period before the children, I guess, started their preparations for school and so on, to actually do their transactions ahead of their daily grind. So it was really interesting to hear about what you said about rules-based versus risk-based, and making sure that, you know, that these considerations are carefully looked at. Okay, Tito, tell us your view on impact and way forward. How do you assess the situation, why it has failed so far, and what needs to be done going forward? And I'm going to ask the same question to Fabio and also Tao.
Well, thank you, Sheila. Well, perhaps I would like to give a brief overview of the outcomes so far on that. But first, let me say that I completely agree that the regulation is a big part of the problem. So I agree with my colleagues here. But I think in terms of the failure of fintech, I think there is one important element that basically people usually fail to take into account, include those very optimistic predictions made by the fintechs, which is cash. A lot of action in the remittance market is cash-based. So we live in a digital world, but cash is still king in many places. So as I said, there has been a decrease in costs, in the pace of, there has been a slowdown in the pace of the cost decrease since 2016. And that coincided precisely with the surge in the number of Remittances in the market. That's not very intuitive. And what we see when you compare the initial narrative from Remittances is that they soon realized that the initial business model, which was an all-digital business model, was not working. And they started partnering with traditional institutions, with MTOs and with banks. So we come from a situation in which the incumbents were assessed as outdated, slow, to a situation in which they wanted to make partnerships to increase their reach, right? And the services that they provide. So this constraint is still very large, that a large part of the remittances action is with cash. And I'm not sure how much regulation can make in that regard. Of course, increasing competition is very welcome, but what I'm trying to say is that the large footprint of MTOs and also banks, which provide easy perhaps sometimes not so easy in the rural areas, of payout locations for remittances. This is still pretty much necessary, and fintechs cannot handle that. So they have to partner with those kind of institutions. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Great. Fabio, can you tell us and elaborate a bit more on the fintechs in Brazil and how this has affected Brazilian financial landscape, how they have impacted financial inclusion with maybe some specific examples, and also picking up where Tito left as to what can be partnership between the usual banks, MTOs, and fintechs, given the dominance of the former.
Yeah. Well, here in Brazil, actually, the first time I would like to say that I agree that the fintechs have not managed to reach the poor perfectly, because we see here in Brazil an increasing sophistication in the market and in services provided by the fintechs, but we didn't see a proportional reduction in cost implied by that. I totally agree with that. We have been working on this fintech market here in Brazil since 2013, at least, with the e-money law, and it broke the vertical arrangements and opened up space for new entrants, and that reduced the cost. We saw cost reduction, but we have a very dynamic market. We have some of the largest new banks here in Brazil now. Nubank, for instance, has 80 million clients here in Brazil and almost 10 million clients in Mexico and Colombia. We have a lot of fintechs working in banking as a service, and many authorized entities use those services as a white label solution, increasing the efficiency of the service that they can provide. But we don't see that translating too much into cost reduction. It has translated into access to services, but they are still too expensive. And I think that the problem is that there are regulatory gaps yet that need to be treated. And as company, the fintechs perceive the possibility to make a larger profit due to regulation barriers, regulation inefficiencies that are there, and they take advantage of that. And I think that the discussion, the international discussion regarding payments is a very important aspect on how can we move forward. We at the Central Bank of Brazil are talking to other central banks. We're talking to the IMF. We're talking to the BIS to try to make sure that we can create this new infrastructure. But for that, what's necessary is a very high degree of coordination among the countries, and there is the need of some international institution to take the lead to help to coordinate these efforts. The G20 is doing that. Next year, Brazil is at the presidency of the G20. We're going to try to move some of this aspect forward. But I think that we need more international coordination, and that's something that with CBDC we could achieve, and we shouldn't let it skip our hands.
Very good. It's actually, we are working very hard on these issues. It's a great segue to what I was going to ask Tao. The G20 just endorsed the roadmap for enhancing cross-border payments in just recently. There was also a lot of discussion in 2020 where we work closely with BIS and FSB colleagues. So Tao, can you tell us what has been achieved so far and what are we looking forward to in the context of the next G20 presidency under Brazil?
Sure. Regarding the topic of fintech remittances, we have to think about from the perspective of public and private partnership. From private sector side, we have to think how do we incentivize private sector to have sufficient resources and even fees to cover their cost. So they have a sustainable business model. And we should give them sufficient time and resources to adapt to regulatory requirements, legal requirements. So this is on private sector side. On the public sector, we need to think about a global collaboration, G20 approach to promote cross-border payments is a good example. As Chela mentioned just now, G20 has been promoting cross-border payments policies in the last couple of years. They have made roughly two major achievements. One is they have made tremendous progress in researching, studying some fundamental principles and policies related to the legacy payment system and the new payment instruments and the interlinking between the traditional one and new one. So this is something policy have been doing paper research. In the process, they have been engaging with private sector as well to get a feedback. This is one part of the work. The second part of the work is this year, they highlighted the three parts of the work to be done in the coming years. It's related to what I mentioned just now of the challenges of fintech are facing. One is how do we ensure the legal regulatory requirements to be met in the G10-20 cross-border framework. Another one is about data framework and messaging. The third one is about how do we ensure the possible usefulness of CBDC potential collaboration of different new payment instruments to ensure their interoperability and the extension of the working hours. Like we have RTGS of working in different countries in different hours. We are thinking how do we integrate the potential extension of hours. So these kind of ways can promote the public sector support for the new initiative on cross-border payments. In this process, the IMF and the World Bank are collaborating closely to do some contribution in the cross-border payments. For example, we are trying to set up a policy. At the same time, we need to consider how to help member countries, especially low-income countries, emerging market economies, to receive our help in the context of technical assistance. So this year, we collaborated closely with the CPMI, World Bank. We produced a so-called IMF World Bank cross-border payments TA approach. We are going to publish the report later this month. The report tries to summarize the multi-year work plan for cross-border payments help for member countries. This process of public and private coordination will be fundamental to promote the role of fintech to be fully implemented in promoting remittances. So it's a kind of challenging work, but we do see the role of technology, data, and the potential ecosystem supported by the sufficient regulatory legal support. Then we can get our eventual targets achieved. Chela.
Thank you for that, Tao. It's a great example of strong World Bank IMF collaboration, especially in the context of capacity development, and that's really great to see. There are 4 questions from the audience, some of which have already been answered. So I'm going to just mention them and then give each of you the floor to both respond and also make your final statements, which all of this has to be done in 3 minutes. So let's see if we can live up to this. The first question was about one of the main reasons for the high costs being AML-CFT. Dilip, you already raised this issue and mentioned the need for more risk-based approach. So I think this is this is a good answer to it, and you can talk a little bit more on this if you like. The second question is about regulation as one important factor that helps to explain high remittance costs, as again, this was something we discussed during the panel. And one specific example the colleague is asking was what Fabio talked about, which was about FX regulations, and I think interoperability was also discussed during the discussion. And I guess the key is going to be making sure that there is international collaboration, which we talked a little bit about as well. The third question is, if you had to pick a winner between stablecoins or CBDC to address remittance issues, which one would you say has an edge and why? I guess interoperability will be critical here, but I'm going to see if any of the panelists wants to make a bet between CBDCs and stablecoins. And the last question, which is actually two people asked similar question, which is there any evidence that if the lowered cost from fintech, would that lead to a larger volume of remittances transferred or replaced, diverted from more traditional channels such as banks? And would that be a potential risk to financial intermediation? And I think this is a great question which we can end with. So I'm going to start with you, Fabio, and ask you to respond to any of these or make your final call for work, for action, and then I'll go to Dilip, Tao, and then end with Tito, who has really done great work on this topic. So over to you, Fabio.
Thank you. I would like to address the stablecoin versus CBDC. I think that both of them work. There is an edge for the CBDC because stablecoins have a private emission risk, and a CBDC doesn't have that. But that's going to depend on what the larger countries are going to adopt. If we have the US working on a stablecoin instead of CBDC, probably we're going to see lots of US denominated stablecoins. But I still think that CBDC would be a best work. And for remittances, I think that we need to take advantage of the situation where all the central banks are discussing this technology and try to coordinate to build a infrastructure that addresses this AML, FX regulation, and data exchange problems that we have mentioned here in the panel. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Great, thank you, Fabio. Dilip.
Yeah, you know, one thing about digital remittances and using digital channels is that to use digital channels, the sender usually has to have a bank account. It is not easy to get to a digital channel without having a bank account. That leads us to the whole issue of unbanked population, which is probably billions of people, and mostly poor people, and poor countries are affected by that. So all this talk about CBDC, stable coins, digital remittances, even mobile money, are conditional on increasing access to bank accounts, something that we must address. The other thing I wanted to mention is that having CBDCs or stable coins, the more we have, the more interoperability or lack thereof problem we will continue to have, and there will be friction. So that is not going to reduce costs. That is the second point. And the third point is that we know that digital remittances, especially mobile money and the Remtechs, are way more efficient and cheaper and faster than banking channels, but they are not necessarily better, cheaper, and reliable than informal channels like Hawala and Hundi. And yet, the entire world wants to go against them. If we reduce costs, that would be the best way to shift flows from informal to formal channels, not go after the informal channels directly without providing the alternative of cheaper and faster ways of sending money.
Yeah. Very good point. Tao.
Let me conclude with a 10-year horizon. If we see from now in 10 years, how do we see the most important factor regarding fintech and remittances? I think two factors. One is demand side, one is supply side. On the demand side, it's user. Everything we should do should ensure we provide sufficient products and services to meet the user demand. That's the fundamental one. From the supply side, we need a very good market with sufficient contestability. That means a lot of potential competition market. Only in this way, we can, in a 10 years horizon, we can see a high speed, low cost, better services of fintech in a remittance market. That's my summary.
Great. Last word, Tito.
Perhaps, thank you. A quick question, whether, if I understood correctly, whether banks would be replaced, something like that. Well, in my paper, I have a table that I think handles precisely that. I think one thing that we can say, after so many bad predictions about disruption in the financial system, is that banks really much remain relevant and showing their relevance and power to counter newcomers. So in that table, I show that when you look at the World Bank database, the entries of the database, you think there could be having a displacement between Remittances and banks, because the percentage of banks have decreased. But when you look at the presence of banks in corridors, they remain as strong as ever, even though Remittances have increased. That's why they are still a crucial part, for the bad or for the good, in the remittances ecosystem. So I think many points have been raised here, which are very interesting and relevant, on regulation, on exclusivity causes. There are a lot of places in which regulation can play an important role. In many African countries, for instance, non-banks cannot enter the remittance market, so firms are obliged to partner with banks and add extra costs. So they still remain pretty relevant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we are already running 5 minutes over time. This was a great discussion, a lot of expertise on this panel, and I look forward to more progress and hopefully reaching the targets, Dilip, that you have been working so hard on, and look forward to working with our Brazilian colleagues as part of their G20 efforts. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks for joining us.